Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, the North Carolina General Assembly's 2026 short session begins today. There is a lot that is set to be dealt with over the next couple of months. I'll bring you all the details coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app by simply searching for the Nick Craig Show. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning is brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. That's lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. Today is a big day for those that follow North Carolina politics closely. It is the kickoff of the 2026 legislative short session. For those that follow or maybe don't follow North Carolina politics as closely, we elect our state lawmakers every 2 years, and we have the long session and the short session. The long session in 2025, in which lawmakers deal with much larger issues. We saw a litany of legislation throughout the last calendar year. There's also supposed to be a budget that obviously has not come to fruition, and it will be a topic now rolling into the short session. But the long session is the year following the election. So you had the election in 2024, where the entire General Assembly was either elected new or re-elected. They get into their business in early 2025, work through the vast majority of the year, come back in the short session, tie up any loose ends. In a normal circumstance where you'd have a budget, there might be some budget amendments, some additions to the budget. However, because of a lack of a budget and some other priorities not being moved forward by the North Carolina General Assembly, I think it is fair to say and fair to assume that we are heading into a very busy time in North Carolina politics. The official calendar released by the North Carolina House, I'll note that this is the House calendar, it is not the Senate calendar, but there should be some pretty strong overlap between the two chambers, shows that in the month of April, the 21st and 22nd, where votes could take place. A similar situation next week, the 28th and 29th in the month of May. We've got voting days on the 5th, 6th, 12th, and 13th, the entire week of May 18th through the 22nd, so likely a lot of activity there. The entire month of June, Tuesday through Thursday, is set for voting days, and as the calendar goes forward, lawmakers are slated to be out of Raleigh just before the July the 4th holiday, the last two voting days, at least from the North Carolina House, as scheduled, noting that this is, of course, a very dynamic calendar. As things come up, as priorities change, things could adapt and move. But as it stands right now, lawmakers' final voting day is set for Thursday, July the 2nd, right ahead of the July the 4th weekend, when lawmakers will gavel out of the short session and make their way back to their districts because, like I mentioned at the open, lawmakers are elected every 2 years. So while, yes, a lot of important business will be taking place in Raleigh over the coming months, lawmakers at the same time have to also get elected or re-elected in their races. There are some different campaign finance laws as it relates to raising money while in session and actively working on legislation. We are expecting to see that break come early July, and lawmakers are spending from that period of time all the way through November trying to get re-elected in their districts. So we are set up for a busy rest of this month, April, a busy May, a very busy June, at least looking at the calendar right now, and potentially a couple of days in July. Now, of course, the dynamics of this short session are pretty dynamic, I'll say. We, of course, had the primary elections that took place in March, and I would argue one of the largest political stories that has hit North Carolina in recent years. the current Speaker of the North Carolina Senate, in Phil Berger, was unsuccessful in his Republican primary. We covered that in great detail here on the Nick Craig Show, losing to Rockingham County Sheriff Sam Page in a primary race. That is a very strong Republican district, so Sam Page, in all likelihood, will become the next member in the Senate from northern Guilford and Rockingham counties. That is up on the Virginia border here in North Carolina. And so there's been a lot of questions kind of bubbling behind the scenes as to what is this session going to look like. Phil Berger, an incredibly influential, an incredibly powerful man in North Carolina politics. Some would argue, and I actually would tend to agree with these individuals, that Phil Berger, obviously things have changed again since the primary, but prior to that, you could very clearly make the argument that Phil Berger was the most important man in North Carolina politics. Now, you might say, well, what about the governor? Yes, of course, the governor is important, but Phil Berger being in the legislature since the year 2000, watching and being part of Republicans capturing and winning the majority in the North Carolina General Assembly in 2010, he had planted himself as an incredibly influential speaker. And that, I mean, it's expected, is it not? 26 years in the legislature, serving as the leader of the Senate for 16 years during the Republican takeover, championing and spearheading things like the tax reductions and reforms that we've seen here in North Carolina, developing the rainy day fund that leaves extra dollars aside for, well, unfortunate events. We saw one just back in 2024, the devastation, the destruction in western North Carolina left in the wake of Hurricane Helene. That only happened because of individuals like Phil Berger. Being in the position that he has been in allowed him to become an incredibly influential and very prominent figure in state government. And so the question has been now for a couple of months, what does the legislative short session look like with Phil Berger now? He is not and will not have the ability to run for re-election in November. As I just noted, he lost his primary. Now he does serve out the remainder of his term, which will end late this year. New lawmakers will be sworn in early January of 2027. So the million-dollar question was and has been and remains to be, what does this short session look like? As I've already noted, and as you are probably familiar with, the state is without a budget. Now, fortunately, due to state law, the previous budget year remains in effect. We don't have the government shutdown like you see in Washington, D.C., so the state is still funded. Things are continuing to operate, but there is a major, and has been for months now, a major budget impasse between the North Carolina House and the North Carolina Senate. As I understand the situation and how it is played out, the issue is over taxes. There are current tax triggers in state law that will continue to reduce the personal income tax and corporate income tax rates based on revenue triggers, meaning if the state generates X number of dollars, the property or the personal income tax and the corporate income tax rate will continue to drop. That was set back by the General Assembly a couple of years ago. There is some disagreement between the House and the Senate. The House is concerned that these cuts are happening too quickly and that it could leave the state with essentially a revenue shortfall. As, of course, you reduce your tax rate, you bring in less dollars. That's just inherent. When people are paying less on what they're making, the state brings in less money. That's what the House's argument is. On the Senate, we have seen the argument that, well, reducing the rate will cause more spending and we will make up said revenues just by the general nature of people having more dollars in their pocket, buying more things, spending more money across the state for corporations, investing more in their businesses by hiring new employees. And so that, as I understand it, has been the big disagreement between the North Carolina House and Senate, which is interesting. Of course, both chambers are controlled by the Republicans. The dynamics are a little bit different, of course. The House is a much larger entity. There are way more members in the North Carolina House than there are in the Senate. So the spending priorities and the way in which money is doled out is very different. And so as we look forward into the next couple of weeks, it is going to be, at least from my vantage point, very interesting to see how these budget negotiations start to play out. Can the House, can the Senate get together on a budget deal and get something to the governor's desk for a signature? And so as lawmakers gavel back in a little bit later on over the next couple of days, I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on those details. Again, the North Carolina General Assembly gaveling back in today for the first day of votes on the legislative short session. Just spent some time talking about the dynamics from the North Carolina Senate and House, the bombshell primary results that we saw in March of this year, with Senate Leader Phil Berger being unsuccessful in his Republican primary against the Rockingham County Sheriff in Sam Page. And well, for the questions about Berger, he is commenting on this. He released a column on his Medium platform, which is kind of like a Substack alternative platform where you can go and publish your own content. And well, I want to read through directly from Senate Leader Phil Berger as to what he is saying ahead of a busy couple of months in Raleigh. And the article, or the column post, reads here as follows. The 2026 short session brings an opportunity to continue North Carolina's economic progress. From the day voters gave Republicans control of the General Assembly after over a century of Democrat rule, we've made progress on numerous fronts. Tax cuts, regulatory reform, restrained spending, K-12 education reforms, parental school choice expansion, transformational university stewardship, and more. Our state is the national leader in smart conservative governance. All Republican legislators elected in 2010 and since share credit for that success. Berger goes on to write, let's not lose sight of the progress on major issues made during the 2025 long session. Working together, the House and Senate enacted reforms to make our communities safer, take important strides towards energy affordability and availability, protecting women's sports, defining the two sexes in state law, and imposing accountability for those who commit serious crimes. And all of what Phil Berger writes here is absolutely true. The 2025 long session was very successful for those that find themselves of a conservative or a Republican persuasion. And the simple facts of the legislation back that up. You know, he talks about the energy situation, passing Senate Bill 249, the reducing some of the interim carbon emission goals here in North Carolina, estimated to save ratepayers anywhere between $13 and $15 billion over the next 10 years as it relates to electricity and utility costs in North Carolina. Passing legislation that protects the ability for young women in the state of North Carolina to participate in sports and have an equal and fair playing field where they do not have to worry about competing against a biological man who is just magically today pretending to be a woman, defining two sexes in state law. Again, going back to protecting women's sports. Look at all of the public safety that we've talked about in recent months. A lot of this kicked off by the horrific, the absolutely brutal murder of Irina Zarutska aboard the Charlotte Light Rail in July of 2025, when a dangerous known criminal in DeCarlos Brown Jr. had been consistently set free by the judicial system in and around Charlotte and Mecklenburg County and was allowed to be sitting on the light rail that fateful night, brutally stabbing and killing a 22-year-old Ukrainian refugee who was doing nothing but coming home from work, was attempting to be a productive, useful member of society, working at a pizza shop in Charlotte, going through the process of trying to pass a driver's test. Her life cut short because of wacko leftist judges and magistrates here across the Tar Heel state. We saw hearings and school boards being hauled in front of the General Assembly, being questioned about inappropriate books in classrooms. There are a lot of major political wins that the Republicans were able to notch onto their belt during the 2025 long session. And so what I take away from this paragraph in Senate Leader Phil Berger's Medium article is talking about working together, where he writes, let's not lose sight of the progress on major issues, because there were a lot of major issues that were dealt with. Talking about working across the chambers, the House and the Senate getting together on issues, seemingly setting the groundwork for what hopefully will be very clear and very fruitful negotiations between the two chambers in the weeks and months to come. Back to the article from Senate Leader Phil Berger. He says, yes, there were matters, primarily those dealing with spending and taxation, on which progress was elusive. In some respects, that should not be surprising. The Republican caucus approaches issues independently, and policy differences do exist. That reflects the diversity of thought and the sanctity of familiar held beliefs within our own party. And even though those disagreements can sometimes be heated, I remain convinced that most of us see opportunity for mutual, respectful debate and principled solutions. I am very, very glad to see Phil Berger say this, and not just Phil Berger, but in general. He is saying something that I've been highlighting for years now. One of the things, and I would argue the thing that makes conservatives and Republicans who we are, is our ability to have free thought. We're not lemmings. We're not sheep like those on the political left, where we all have to sing off of the same sheet of music. We all have to agree with the same thing. Even if we don't really believe in it, we all just get our marching orders from those above us and march down the road in unison. Now, I've also said this as it relates to our differences. It is our greatest strength, and it also can be our greatest weakness. The individualism that we have on the political right, the difference in thought, gives us very unique ideas and allows us to, I believe, govern in a very effective manner. However, we've seen, for example, like the budget, where that individualism has led to a budget stalemate and has given Democrats, not only here in North Carolina, but across the country, a major political talking point. Because here's the fact of the matter. North Carolina is the only state in the nation that did not pass a budget in 2025. That is a fact. Now, again, as I mentioned in the previous segment, the state has a provision in state law that if there is no budget passed, the previous year's budget just continues forward. So spending levels stay exactly the same. All the government agencies remain funded. There are no cost of living increases. There's no pay increases. None of that stuff exists, but government doesn't shut down. And for those that follow North Carolina politics pretty closely, you have seen this discussion take place. You have seen that Democrats have continually hammered the Republican-led General Assembly over their inability to pass a budget. And I would say that if Republicans cannot get together on a budget, and I don't have any insider information on this, if they can't get together on a budget during this short session over the next couple of months leading into July, that is going to give Democrats an incredible upper hand in the midterm elections as it relates to the General Assembly later this year. We have seen in political poll after political poll, people are frustrated with the fact that there is no budget passed here in North Carolina. And so in terms of top priorities for lawmakers, I can only imagine that the budget has to be number one on that list. I'd have to imagine that that's the case. Yes, there's other important issues. We'll get into some of that stuff here in just a couple of minutes, but the budget has got to be the big prize. And so the question for me is, how quickly do we see something like this come to fruition? I've heard differing reports as to how quickly this might happen. Could happen very quickly, could happen over the next couple of weeks. And so I'll be, of course, keeping a close eye on that as we continue to watch details out of the legislature. We'll get into more on this column from Senate Leader Phil Berger, plus the calendar, which includes a plethora of veto overrides in the North Carolina House. We'll get into all of those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington, Melissa Gott and her team. Thank them for their continued support of the program. I had the pleasure of working with Melissa and her team back, it's hard to say and believe, almost 6 years ago when I went through the process of purchasing my home. As a first-time home buyer, I did not necessarily understand the entire process, of course. Brand new situation to me. So one of the first things I did as I was going through the process, reach out to Melissa Gott and her team over at the law group and get them on board and figure out and walk through any of the issues or problems I had, any questions that I had. I reached out to Melissa and her team. They answered all of those questions as quickly as possible. And I'll note that this was in the middle of COVID-19. Things were very weird. Things were shut down. However, the law group really walked me through every single process of purchasing my home, and I could not recommend them any higher. They're located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088. You can also visit them online, lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online, lawgroupnc.com. It's the law group. Experience and dedication you can rely on for any legal challenges you might be facing here in southeastern North Carolina. Reach out to the law group, 910-251-6088. We appreciate them and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. All right, we'll grab a quick break. On the other side, we'll get into more from Phil Berger, plus we'll look at the calendar from the North Carolina House. A busy couple of months here on the Nick Craig Show. We'll bring you all the details as the show rolls on this Tuesday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time with us on a busy day here across the state of North Carolina, the first day of the legislative short session, which will run through the remainder of April, May, June, and a couple of days in July ahead of the July the 4th holiday. A lot on the agenda for lawmakers in Raleigh. We're currently going through an article published by Senate Leader Phil Berger that he wrote over at his Medium.com platform, talking and kind of laying the stage for this legislative short session, talking about getting together between the North Carolina House and Senate on some of the things that they agree on. He's talking about the major accomplishments in 2025 and talking about, yes, there are differences, especially as it relates to the budget, which we have all seen play out in front of our very eyes as North Carolina remains the only state in the nation without a budget passed in 2025. So back to the Berger article. He writes, "Today, North Carolina is at a critical inflection point, and we need to come together for the good of our state and to continue the progress we've made over the last decade and a half. President Trump and Republicans at the federal level are implementing a national vision that is largely aligned with what we have instituted in North Carolina. With that, new opportunities are now present for positive improvements in power generation and affordability, healthcare affordability through free market reforms, and to limit fraud in safety net programs so that those programs can help citizens truly in need. And yes, circumstances do exist for us to reach an agreement on a comprehensive state budget. In crafting the state spending plan, we must recognize that the seeds for today's success, being the number one state for business, Republican voters now outnumber Democrats and continue legislative majorities. Those were planted 15 years ago." Berger goes on to say, "What we will do today will impact North Carolinians for the next 15 years. Our policy success is largely grounded on the continuing exercise of discipline on two fronts: tax reduction and spending restraints. Failure to adhere to the fundamentals on either front will thwart sustained progress in our never-ending competition with other states for economic growth, job creation, and a better future for our people." He continues, "While the worst of the Bidenflation is behind us, North Carolinians still feel the strain of higher prices caused by inflationary policies advanced by Democrats. Now is the time for relief for working families and small businesses, a time to mitigate higher costs. We can do that in part with the innovative and thoughtful reforms to ever-increasing property tax bills at the local level. We can also continue to provide tax relief at the state level. We know from experience that you can have both a well-qualified workforce and a competitive tax and business climate. Our CNBC ranking shows that to be the case. We just have to continue carefully avoiding needless ballooning of our budgets. When working towards solutions, it is good to reflect on what we've accomplished together. Our progress has been achieved despite the naysayers, the interest groups, the editorial writers, and of course, the Democrats, who have all falsely claimed a fiscally responsible approach to taxes and budgeting will cause a catastrophe. Proven wrong time and time again, they continue to repeat their same tired and erroneous refrain. And this is a very great point brought up by Phil Berger. Since Republicans took control, going all the way back to the 2010 midterm elections, those members sworn in early 2011 and really hit the ground running, we have in fact heard that same tired old line from Democrats that reducing the bloat, reducing the spending within state government is going to lead the state to a complete and total collapse. And I can say this with 100% confidence. 100% confidence. What the Republican majority has done over the last 15 years has been absolutely incredible and has defied every single point that the Democrats have made. Our state has plenty of money. Our taxes have been reduced dramatically compared to what they were previous to 2010. And with that, as Phil Berger notes in his article, CNBC has ranked North Carolina 3 out of the last 5 years as the number 1 state for business. Ladies and gentlemen, that does not happen by accident. It doesn't. That happens when you are very clear and you are very concise with what is going on with the budget, what is going on with state spending. That does not happen under Democrat control. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at the financial state that North Carolina was in 2010. Owed millions of dollars to the federal government, had some of the highest taxes anywhere in the southeast half of the United States. People were getting squeezed day in and day out, and the state's budget just kept ballooning year after year after year. It was textbook tax and spend policies by Democrats who had controlled the state for 100 years leading up to 2010. That is what Democrats left us. And, as we go deeper into this year and as we talk about midterm elections in November, that is something that a lot of folks, especially a lot of newer folks in North Carolina, need to be able and willing to wrap their head around. We know what Democrat leadership looks like. We know what Democrat control looks like. And you don't have to go back 100 years to see it. You can go back less than 20 years and see the state that North Carolina was in. It was not good. It was a state in decline. People were leaving North Carolina and seeking safe harbor in other states. Why? Because it was too expensive to live here. Because state government had way outgrown its size. Because each and every year, Democrats in Raleigh would continue to take more and more of your dollars to dole it out to garbage, nonsensical, big government programs that did not make your life any better, that did not provide you with any sort of better lifestyle or well-being. Now, it was textbook tax and spend. That is the alternative. Does that mean that Republicans are perfect in everything that they do? It does not. It does not mean that. But I can say with 100% certainty, if this state is given back to Democrats this November, if Democrats may get a majority in the North Carolina House and Senate, they will destroy what the state has become. They will immediately jack up your taxes. They will immediately make it less affordable for you to live here in North Carolina. They will out-leverage themselves, and the state will be in financial ruin. Again, don't take my word for it. Go look at the state of North Carolina, 2008, 2009, 2010. Don't believe me. Call me a liar if you must. Go look at it. It's very clear. There are news stories and reports from WRAL, the News and Observer, the Charlotte Observer, all from that period of time, all in the archives that you can go and read and see truly where North Carolina was after 100 years of Democrat control. It was an unmitigated disaster, exclusively at the hands of Democrats. More from the Berger article. He writes, history should help guide our steps on those issues, and we should focus on solutions to common challenges. Crime, poverty, socialism, wasteful bureaucracy, and radical ideologies that prevent everyday North Carolinians from achieving the American dream. None of these policy questions will be resolved by a long message from me. Only time and good faith engagement through the legislative process can do that. But my goal in sharing these thoughts directly and in writing is that we can approach the next few weeks with a clear understanding of the challenges, opportunities, and choices before us, even if we haven't yet found a pathway to successfully resolve the decisions to be made. My hope is to continue our solutions-oriented approach to policy that has made the North Carolina General Assembly the most successful and effective conservative legislative body in the country. Signed, Senate Leader Phil Berger. Very strong message there from Phil Berger and gives me a lot of confidence leading into the legislative short session. We have been talking about how a busy day, a busy week, and busy couple of months in Raleigh are now ahead of us as the North Carolina General Assembly is back in Raleigh for the 2026 legislative short session. Activities kicking off, voting days kicking off in Raleigh throughout the remainder of April, May, June, and a couple of days in July. And so let me just kind of lay out where things stand right now. The budget, as I've been talking about, will remain probably the top priority, and I would argue should be the top priority for lawmakers. The state needs a budget. It is giving Democrats a major political win when they can run around and use their friends in the North Carolina media to claim that North Carolina, and it's accurate, that North Carolina doesn't have a budget. And frankly, it makes the Republican majority look incompetent. I mean, plain and simple. I'm not trying to be ugly about it, but it's the truth. You've got Republicans controlling the Senate and Republicans controlling the House. And it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to have differences. I would argue, and will continue to argue, that is a good thing. It is what makes the conservatives and Republicans, not only here in North Carolina, but across the nation, so effective at what they do. It is that individualism. It is that free thought that exists. It is a good thing to have. But you can't be without a state budget when you control both chambers of government, when you control the House and the Senate. So that has got to be the number one priority for lawmakers in both the House and the Senate. The House, however, does have a different set of issues. There have been now, for the last couple of months, 6 veto overrides that have remained on the North Carolina House calendar. These are pieces of legislation that were passed in 2025 by the North Carolina House, by the North Carolina Senate. They were sent to the governor's desk for a signature. No surprise, our Democrat governor and Josh Stein does not agree with the vast majority of the things that you and I do and believe as it relates to our conservative and Republican principles. So he vetoed these pieces of legislation. Here in North Carolina, in large part thanks to old Roy Cooper, we have a veto override system that allows a 3/5 majority of the General Assembly, each chamber, the Senate and the House, to override the veto of a governor and enact state law. The veto overrides have already been done in the North Carolina Senate, where Republicans have that veto-proof majority. In the North Carolina House, they are 1 vote shy of that majority, meaning that one Democrat has to cross the aisle and vote with Republicans for these things to become law. And there are some major policy things in here. And I think the one that most people are familiar with is Senate Bill 50, known as Freedom to Carry NC, also known as constitutional carry. This has been debated for a long time in Raleigh over the last couple of years, and lawmakers, again, this legislative session, passing it. It went to the governor's desk. No surprise there. The governor vetoed constitutional carry. It has been through the veto override process in the Senate, and the question is going to be, can House Speaker Destin Hall not only whip all the Republican votes, but convince one Democrat to cross the aisle and vote for Senate Bill 50? We've also got Senate Bill 153. That's the North Carolina Border Protection Act, dealing with immigration here across the state of North Carolina, a major political topic. 3 different DEI bills, equity in state agencies / prohibition on diversity, equity, and inclusion, eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion in public education, and eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion in public higher education. That would be through the UNC and community college system here in North Carolina. 3 different DEI bills remain on the House calendar. The last piece of legislation that remains for the override is the Educational Choice for Children Act, known as the ECCA. That deals with new availabilities within the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed at the federal level, which allows individuals to write off part of their taxes to provide education funding to private schools across now the entire U.S. government and to give families a greater opportunity for school choice. And so these items have remained on the House calendar now for months, going all the way back to late 2025. Now, there are some interesting dynamics in Raleigh now. You have a couple of representatives, probably the one that is probably set to get the most attention, Democrat Representative Carla Cunningham in the Charlotte area, who was beaten in her primary after Democrats, including Democrat Governor Josh Stein, put up a more radical, a more progressive candidate. Representative Cunningham had the audacity, according to Democrats, to vote with Republicans on holding criminals accountable. She helped Republicans override vetoes in the House dealing with crime and public safety, which obviously remains a major topic, a very large topic in Charlotte, our state's largest city. For that, she was singled out by Democrats here across the state of North Carolina, and it is going to be fascinating to see it to really finally give in to the Democrat Party here, vote with the Republicans, and give them this veto-proof majority. There are a couple of other Democrats that had similar situations against them as well. Are those individuals so frustrated, so ticked off, so annoyed with what the state Democrat Party did to them that they crossed the aisle? Now, I'm not saying that I think Representative Cunningham is going to switch her party affiliation, but folks, we've seen this before. Representative Tricia Cotham, also from the Charlotte area. She was a Democrat back just a couple of years ago. However, Democrats harassed her so much. She had people coming up to her in Target when she was with her children, harassing her over how she voted on legislation as it related to school choice and educational freedom, that she literally switched her party, giving Republicans a supermajority during the 2023 and 2024 legislative sessions, because Democrats here in this state are so nasty. They are so ruthless that they will eat their own, turn on each other with the snap of a finger. It happens immediately. And instead of Carla Cunningham being allowed to vote her conscience on those pieces of legislation, Democrats primaried her and are forcing her out of office. So is there a way that Destin Hall, that Republican leadership in the General Assembly, can convince her to vote with them and give them that 3/5 veto-proof majority? I don't know what the answer to that question is, but what I can say with almost total certainty is that those conversations have been taking place, because these are major policy issues, and probably the largest here, Senate Bill 50, constitutional carry, which would be a major change for North Carolina. And so just kind of rounding all of this up, you've got the budget. Obviously, that is the crown jewel in all of this. That's the real prize from lawmakers, is to get a comprehensive state budget, not only debated, but passed, hopefully signed by Stein. He'll probably veto it anyway, because it won't give teachers a 7,000% increase or something like that in their salary. So they'll probably have to come back and do a veto override of that, which hopefully they'll be successful in doing. And then the 6 veto overrides that remain on the House calendar. There are other issues that are likely to come up as well, including involuntary commitment, what is called the levy limit, which would restrict how much local governments, including cities and towns across the state of North Carolina, can increase property taxes year over year. There are still some major issues in this short session that we will be keeping a very close eye on. I track this stuff religiously. If you are not following me over on social media, give me a follow over on X at Nicholas M. Craig, or like the Nick Craig Show over on Facebook. And so you will keep up to date with that news as it breaks straight out of the North Carolina legislature. I akin a day like today a little bit to the start of the baseball or football season for those that are really into state politics. It is an exciting day in Raleigh as those lawmakers will make their way and are expected to make their way back to the General Assembly, to the state capitol to continue to work. Again, here is the calendar. Voting days today and tomorrow, the 21st and 22nd. I will note that the House calendar has these veto overrides on them. However, that is not normally a strong indication that votes will actually be taking place on this. They will likely gavel in at noon today, right at 12 o'clock, and we'll see where these things are moved to. I do not believe, I've got it on, I believe, pretty strong authority that those votes are not going to be happening today. So we'll see if that gets moved to maybe next week, a week in early May when lawmakers are expected back. But as of right now, that stuff is on the House calendar for today. However, not expecting any movement on that. However, I'll keep you up to date with all of that over on our my social media channels, Twitter and X, and then, of course, we'll bring you the latest the next morning right here on the Nick Craig Show. Quick programming note, I will be filling in for Vince Coakley. For those listening live or after the fact this morning, I'll be filling in for Vince Coakley 10 to noon on WBT Radio today. I'll be kind of doing a little bit of a recap on what we talked about here this morning with the North Carolina General Assembly, plus a very disturbing report out from the state auditor's office showing how community colleges spent $1.25 million on things like bird watching tours, rhinoceros plushie toys, stress balls, t-shirts, pizza parties, and salt therapy. Some great money being spent here in Western North Carolina as the state picks up from the devastation and destruction from Hurricane Helene. We'll dive into all those details 10 to noon today on WBT Radio. You can listen 107.9 FM in Charlotte. You can also stream it on any of your favorite radio apps or listen on their website, WBT.com. And then, of course, back here tomorrow morning. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. We'll keep an eye on the General Assembly, have all the latest coming up for you tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.